Hello viewers, welcome to K Diagnostics, Dio here. Today we have a 2006 Honda CRV. This vehicle came to us for front brake service. So in this video I'm going to show you how to remove and replace front brake rotors and brake pads on this 2006 Honda CRV. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the tire. After removing the tire, then I will show you what we're going to do next so we can get the brake rotor and the pads replaced. So now let's remove the tire. Alright, so I got the tire removed. So now the next step will be removing the brake caliper. So I'm going to turn the steering knuckle towards the passenger side. So we're just going to turn the steering knuckle right there. So now I'm going to bring you guys over here in the wheel well so that we can get the brake caliper removed. The brake caliper has two bolts that hold it onto the caliper bracket. So we're going to remove this bolt up here and then this one down here. These are 12mm bolts. But before we remove these two bolts, we're going to have to retract the caliper pistons first. We retract the caliper pistons by inserting a screwdriver inside this inspection hole and prying the caliper. Okay, so we're going to pry towards the outside and this is going to free up the caliper. As you can see, the caliper is free. So now we're going to undo these two bolts so that we can remove the caliper. So here comes the first one. Alright, so here comes the second caliper bolt. So now we're just going to lift the caliper and get it out of the way. So what we need to do is we just have to find a way and sit the caliper back here. Okay, so what you don't want is having the caliper hang on the brake hose. So you don't want to hang the caliper down, so you have to make sure that the caliper is resting somewhere over here. Okay, so I'm going to try to have it rest on the lower control arm. Alright, so right there I got the caliper tack behind the strut, so that's good. So now we're going to remove the brake pads. So we're going to remove this pad springs first. So let's get these out of the way. And now we're going to remove the pads. So here comes the first one. And we're going to remove the second one. Alright, so we also want to check these caliper pins and make sure the caliper pins are sliding in and out very easily. And as you can see, these caliper pins are not stuck. So this is good. So now we're going to remove the caliper bracket. The caliper bracket has two bolts back here. So there's this one down over here and then this one up here. So I'm going to undo these two bolts, so this one and that one up here, so that we can remove the caliper bracket. So I'll get these two bolts undone and then the caliper bracket will come out. The caliper bracket bolts are 17mm bolts. So I'm going to undo these. So let's undo the other one. So right there. So now I'm going to use our electric ratchet to remove the bolt. So here comes the first one. Alright, so here comes the second bolt. And then I can slide the caliper bracket out. So here comes the caliper bracket. So let's get it out of the way. Alright, so we removed the brake caliper and the caliper bracket. So now we are down to the last step, which is removing the brake rotor. So we're gonna remove the brake rotor. We're gonna remove the brake rotor by removing these two tiny screws that hold the rotor onto the hub flange. So I'm going to undo these two screws. They are actually Phillips screws. So we're gonna remove these two screws. And before I remove the last one all the way, so this is gonna stay on because I'm gonna have to smack the rotor with a hammer. As you can see right now, I'm moving the rotor. The rotor is stuck to the hub flange, okay? So if I remove this screw all the way, and as I smack the rotor with the hammer, the rotor is gonna fly off and fall on the ground. And if you're not careful, it can fall on your feet and hurt you. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave this screw on, okay? So this will prevent the rotor from flying off. So now I'm gonna get a hammer so we can smack this rotor. So we're just gonna tap right here. So right there, as you can see, the brake rotor is now loose. So now we can remove it. So I'm gonna remove this screw now. So the brake rotor can now come out. There's a lot of rust built up. Alright, so here comes the brake rotor. So now I'm going to get the rotor out of the way. So we have removed the brake rotor and here is the hub flange. So now we're going to clean up the hub flange before we install the new rotor. So I'm going to get the hub flange cleaned now. Alright, so we've cleaned the hub flange. So this is pretty much as clean as I'm going to be able to get it. So after cleaning this, now the next step will be prepping the new brake rotor and the caliper bracket. So we're going to prep the new brake rotor and then we'll bring it up here so we can install it. So now let's prep the brake rotor and the caliper bracket. Alright, so here is our brake rotor and this is the part number for the brake rotor. So we're gonna get the brake rotor out of the box. So I'm gonna open up the box for the brake rotor. Alright, so here's the new brake rotor. So we're gonna use some brake cleaner to clean the lube from the factory of the brake rotor, because when they make these brake rotors they spray a lube on them to prevent these rotors from rusting. So we're gonna clean this lube. Alright, so this is good. So now I can just sit the brake rotor right over here on its box, and all the brake fluid that I just sprayed is just on the box, so because we're gonna trash the box. So now we're gonna prep our caliper bracket. So here's the caliper bracket. So now we're gonna remove the brake pad springs. So here comes the pad spring. So I'm going to clean the spring seat. Okay, so we're just going to use a wire brush to clean this up. So that's pretty clean. I hope you can see that. So now we're going to install our new brake pad spring. So we're going to apply just a little bit of anti-seize in this area. And now our new spring is just gonna sit right here. So here is the new spring. So now we're gonna do the same thing on this side. So we're gonna apply just a little bit of anti-seize compound here. Alright, so here's our second spring installed. So now we have to check the caliper sliding pins. So the caliper pins over here, the pins are sliding freely, but we're gonna take them out and loop them just a little bit. I mean, luckily they're not stuck. So here comes the first pin. We're just gonna apply a little bit of anti-seize compound there and just put it back on. So that's good. And you have to be careful not to puncture the pin boot. So I'm gonna remove the second pin, just pull it out. Alright, so that's good. We have prepped our caliper bracket. So now we can go back to the vehicle and install our new brake rotor and then install the caliper bracket. So now let's go to the vehicle. Alright, so before I install the new brake rotor, I'm going to apply a little bit of anti-seize compound on this hub flange. This will prevent the new rotor from sticking to the hub flange like the other one did. So this is good. So now let's install the new brake rotor. So the brake rotor is on. So now we're going to install these tiny retaining screws. Alright, so I got these screws tightened. So now we're going to install the caliper bracket. We're going to turn the steering knuckle towards the passenger side. Alright, so now I'm going to install the caliper bracket. Alright, so now I'm going to tighten the caliper bracket bolt. Alright, so I tightened the caliper bracket bolt. I'm going to show you the bolts that I just tightened and then we're going to install the new brake pads. We got the caliper bracket installed and here are the bolts that I was tightening. So there's this bolt up here and then this one down here. So we got these two caliper bracket bolts tightened. So now we're going to install our brake pads. We're gonna start by installing the outer pad first. I did apply a little bit of anti-seize compound on the backing plate of the pad, not on the friction material, but on the metal part, so the outside side of the pad. So we're gonna install this one. So that's installed. So now we're gonna install the inner pad. So what this anti-seize compound does, it helps prevent the brakes from squeaking. So it's always good to apply a little bit of anti-seize compound on the pads or a little bit of brake grease to prevent the brakes from squeaking. So it always helps to put a little bit of grease on the pads. So we got the new pads installed, and as you can see, our caliper pins are sliding in and out easily. We lubed them, so they're all good to go. As you can see, our caliper pins are sliding in and out smoothly. They are not binding, so this is good. So now we're gonna install the brake caliper. Before we install the brake caliper, we're gonna install these pad springs first. So these springs go to a little hole here on the pad, and then it's gonna go on the other hole. So it goes right there. So those are on. You have to make sure you're holding the pads, because if you let the pads go, the springs will push the pads outward. Okay, so now we're just gonna... Alright, so here comes our caliper. So the caliper is installed. So now we're gonna install the caliper bolt. So now I'm gonna tighten the caliper bolt. Alright, so I tightened all the caliper bolts. So now we are ready to install the tire. So we're basically down to the last step, which is installing the tire. So we're gonna double check everything. We're gonna make sure that all our bolts are tightened, and we're gonna make sure that there's no grease on the brake rotor. So everything looks good. All the bolts are tightened. So now we're gonna put the tire back on. Alright, so that's it, guys. This is how you remove and replace front rotors and pads on this 2006 Honda CRV. I'm gonna leave it right over here. I hope you like this video. If you do like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why, so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.